Hi, I'm Donna Gairns, the National Lymphoma Nurse Manager with Lymphoma Australia, and I'm joined here with Dr. Andy Evens from Rutgers in New Jersey to talk about the HoLISTIC research group. Andy, thank you for coming and joining me today to have a chat. Would you like to explain a little bit what the group is about?
Sure. First, thank you for the invitation. And it's one that is a new consortium, and we haven't even officially, I would say even externally announced it, but it's called, the acronym is HoLISTIC, which stands for Hodgkin Lymphoma International Study for Individual Care. It's a little bit wordy. And we actually have a website. It's hodgkinconsortium.com or .org. Hodgkin spelled Hodgkin. And what is it? It's a group, a worldwide group, I should say, of nearly 50 investigators. And number one. Number two, it's really what I would say multidisciplinary, where there are adult oncologists, pediatric oncologists, radiation oncologists, obviously statisticians involved in it, what's called decision-making analyst, as well as, of course, patients and patient foundations to give us that input, because ultimately, I would say at the real high level, it's how can we help enhance decision-making for providers treating patients with Hodgkin lymphoma.
Fantastic. And when was the group put together?
So yeah, it's been years, and so like any maybe big group, especially worldwide, it can take a little bit to cultivate it, because it's great to have a group in the meeting, but what we really, if we come down a little bit on more granular, is great to meet and have ideas, but we literally are trying to take all of the world's data as much as possible, North America, Europe, etc., and can we combine it in a way into one large database that ultimately can help providers and patients in the clinic or in the hospital.
Is it like a registry where clinicians can enter in patients' information or the treatments they've had and things like that?
Yeah,
or?
a little more formalized in a way.
Yeah.
In other words, so we're taking, I would say there's two segments to it. The first segment we're kind of in the middle of right now, taking already published clinical trials. And so all ages, pediatric, adult, early stage, advanced stage, so all stages. And so really seminal publications in the New England Journal, et cetera. And not just to do a meta-analysis, but actually literally individual patient data, it's called IPD, like those individual files. And this is over 12,000 patients, individual files. And kind of, again, it takes a lot of work because they are each entered a little differently, and to literally put them into a database that's harmonized and called normalized, because at the end of the day, you want, if someone has a similar patient who's been treated in different ways, it's not meant to tell anyone you should get this or you should receive this. It's more, well, if it's a patient with these characteristics and I receive treatment A, B, or C, here's what I think best on best available data in the world, what my likely outcomes are.
Okay. And you're looking at like side effects and with including patient outcomes?
It is. And that's a tricky thing in Hodgkin's. Not so much the acute side effects, that's important, and we are going to detail that as well. But what's tricky in Hodgkin's are the so-called late effects. And so what do we mean by late effects is we've known for decades Hodgkin's is very treatable, curable.
Yep.
High majority of patients. Number one. Number two, most are younger, in their 20s and 30s. So that's great. What does that mean? They're going to live another 50, 60, however many years. And so our treatments are good, and what we've realized is 20, 30, or 40 years down the road, there can be increased late effects, whether another cancer due to the treatment, cardiac disease, other arterial disease, and neuropathy, etc. But the trouble is, if we're looking at data 30 years ago, that's kind of outdated therapy. And so how can we, so part of the project, the second part is, how can we take best available data, okay, from 30 years ago, we know what current treatment is, can we project 30 years from now potential late effects? And so to do that, it's hard with clinical trials. So one fallacy of clinical trials is not a lot of them have follow-up beyond 5 or 10 years. When we want these late effects, so we also are accessing registries throughout mostly North America, and who have varied decades of follow-up. And so we're getting those individual files. So at the end of the day, in very short order, we're actively synthesizing data. And so within the next month or two, we'll have hopefully upwards of 20,000 files to tell us, okay, here's how we think you do with these treatments acutely within the first few years. And here's what we think it might potentially be attributed later in life. And really just helping the patient and, of course, the provider, too, at the point of care.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, adolescents, young adults is a specialty area of mine, and I know a lot of my patients do have a lot of issues with those physical side effects down the track, so that's fantastic. Is the group looking at meeting together and sort of working out what sort of trials might be good for this patient group for future, looking at the toxicities?
Yeah, that's a
as well?
fantastic question. So, yes, is a quick answer. So we want to get kind of the data, help point of care, but what you can do when you have this contemporary data across multiple sources, it can provide information, we think, that can inform new clinical trials. A lot of our, what we call prognostication systems are kind of old. And so what's the prognostication in 2019, 2020? And then with contemporary therapy. And then you can also find what's called maybe surrogates, markers that can help inform clinical trials. So absolutely, we want to help inform that as well.
Oh, wonderful. And you're looking at maybe developing guidelines, optimal care pathways of what the best treatment, is that going a bit too far?
No, I would say yes, but again, we don't want to be prescriptive in it. And so it's really, at some point, once we synthesize all the data and do all the beta testing, validation, et cetera, and again, pediatrics, oncology, so we have a lot of stakeholders involved, it's really going to be open source. And so more for people to ultimately obviously be online at some point in the not too near, hopefully distant future, but for people just to interrogate and say, enter my patient-specific characteristics and look at different variables. And so just to kind of somewhat more exploration, now maybe some guidelines could be put out with that. One other thing I'll add is we're really thrilled to work with different patient foundations. So Lymphoma Coalition has been a really awesome partner in this, and we really think, because obviously if we're developing something that involves patients, we need patients involved in the process itself, as well as Lymphoma Research Foundation, Leukemia Lymphoma Society. So it's literally everyone coming together, not working on their different islands of studies, say, hey, how can we combine data? It's not the answer for everything, but just get us more information to help inform the decision.
Fantastic. And is there a way that even Australian patients or anyone around the world, Hodgkin lymphoma patients, can get involved in this, or is it more through the foundations in their countries?
No, I would think there is a way. We don't have, I would say, a super formal way now, but it would be through the foundation. So like Lymphoma Coalition, it would be more involvement in your coalition or whichever coalition foundation is in your area. Because part of this is going to be surveys. We can't assume. I mean, the providers have certain viewpoints and ways we think things should be handled, but of course we want to know the patient's viewpoint, and they don't always match up perfectly line to line. And so you just want everything to kind of come together and just as that richness. And listen, it's so hard because it's busy, and we ultimately want to get patients, providers, kind of quick access to robust information to help them make as most informed decision.
Wonderful. And just lastly, is there a way that patients can see the outcomes from your group online or?
So there is a website. So the data, we haven't released the data till it's synthesized. We have the description of it. It's at www.hodgkinconsortium.com. Maybe we can link it to this interview somehow, or through the code. They could contact you or Lorna Warwick, and we could they could see the framework of it. But no, and there are a few early papers, but no, as we go along, we don't want to release data too early. But once it's ready, we want this to be open source so people can see it and use it as they deem best.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andy. I appreciate your time, and I think it's fantastic work that you're doing for Hodgkin lymphoma patients.
Thank you so much.